Okay. We're just continuing these ideas of, looking for certain elements in writing. So compare and contrast, sequencing, order of events, all these things that we've been looking at. And so, same kind of rules apply. We look for those signal words that tell us something that's getting ready to, either contrast with the statement before it or compare the statement before it. So like in addition to, that's going to compare something, whereas however, it's going to be contrasted. And we'll look at a Venn diagram. If you're not familiar with that, you'll probably, once you see it, if you don't remember the name, you'll understand what it is. It's basically two circles that overlap. And so you'll have one thing on one side that's completely different and one thing on the other side that's completely different. And then through the center, you have things that fall into both categories. And you don't have to just do two circles. You'll see some kind of complex Venn diagrams. You might have 3 or 4 circles that overlap. All right, so anyway, that's the idea for the lesson today. We're going to define terms, compare and contrast. We'll look at these signal words to find similarities or differences, and then we'll interpret a Venn diagram. All right, and I'm sure we got some audio here. I'll start our audio.
Authors often compare and contrast to make or strengthen a point. To compare is to look for similarities between at least 2 things. You might explain how an orange is like an apple. Both are fruits, both are round, and both have outer skins. To contrast, however, is to look for differences. When contrasting, you might explain that an orange has a tough outer skin, but an apple's outer skin is thin and easier to tear. Certain words such as in addition to and likewise can help signal similarities. Other signal words such as however, whereas, on the other hand, and in contrast signal differences. A Venn diagram is useful in showing how 2 or more objects or ideas are similar and different.
Right. So, comparing is explaining the similarities of several objects or 2 objects, and contrasting is showing the differences between at least 2 objects. So, it's a real common, instructors, if you have like a writing exercise or something, you'll see an instruction to compare and contrast apples and oranges. What are their similarities? And then contrasting is what are their differences. So yeah, they're both fruit. There's a similarity. That's a comparison. They may have like similar nutritional information, like certain vitamins that they both share. And then in contrast, right, one is citrus and has a much thicker skin. One has a thinner skin. They taste different. One might be sweeter. One's a little more sour. Whatever. Those are basically how you compare and contrast things. And then you look for those signal words, like we keep talking about. In addition to, likewise, additionally, moreover, furthermore. Those would signal more of a comparison. And then words like however, on the other hand, in contrast, but, yet, things like that are signaling a contrast. So let's see. All right, some more text here. So, always thinking about our titles. Here we have methods of opposing generals. So generals Robert E. Lee and William T. Sherman both secured their places in U.S. history as a result of their efforts during the U.S. Civil War. Lee rose to become general-in-chief of all Confederate armies, and Sherman led Union troops in crucial battles at Shiloh, Chattanooga, Atlanta, and Savannah. Believing that the means to ultimate success was to defeat Union troops on Northern soil, Lee led his Army of Northern Virginia into Pennsylvania in early June 1863. Lee's aim was to capture the railroad hub at Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and force Union troops in Virginia to move north to engage him. While marching through the fields of Pennsylvania, Lee forbade his troops from looting the farms or destroying any homes. The Confederate troops used useless Confederate money to pay for the food they took to support their army. Oh, gee, Confederate dollars. Thank you. Anyhow, nearly a year later, in May 1864, Sherman began his march through Georgia to the sea. Unlike Lee, Sherman encouraged his men to take all the food and livestock from the farms they passed. Sherman needed food because he was cut off from Union supplies. He also burned homes and barns. Sherman's aim was to demoralize the South and destroy supplies that could be used to aid the Confederates. He was certain that not only defeating the Confederacy, but also obliterating the Southern's will to wage war was vital in preserving the Union after the war's end. And that is what made William Sherman a better general than Robert E. Lee. He understood modern war. But we'll save that for another social studies lesson someday. Our text box says, the first paragraph compares Lee and Sherman on the basis of their significance in U.S. history, right? They're both generals. They both were significant personalities, individuals in the U.S. Civil War. Later paragraphs contrast the generals by giving examples of actions they took during military advances. And they have the little underlined section here, believing that the means to ultimate success was to defeat Union troops on Northern soil. So the passage identifies the generals' differing strategies for winning the war. From this information, you can identify not only differences between the generals, but also a goal that they shared. That's usually a lot of times how compare and contrast sort of writing will be set up. You'll, maybe at the beginning part of your introduction, you'll have it set up to compare them. And then typically, one paragraph will deal with, one item, or in this case, one individual. So we're looking at Robert E. Lee, and we discuss, how he fought, what he did. And then in contrast, we'll move to the next paragraph and talk about Sherman and the different style, the different strategy between the two. The way this is organized is pretty standard for that type of comparing and contrasting. And you may go back and forth, if it's if it's like an essay or something like that, there may be several sections where you jump back and forth between comparing people, things, places, whatever it may be, and contrasting them. All right. Okay, so we hop over to the quiz. So on to student book. Unit 1, lesson 6, quiz. Okay, I'm going to start this up here. All right, and again, same passage, talking about opposing generals, Lee's style as opposed to Sherman's. A lot of apologists like to talk about General Lee being this noble, he didn't do this during the war and this and that. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter because he was fighting against the United States. And no matter what you can say about the man, his decided to, attempt to preserve the institution of slavery. And was an enemy of the United States. And that's about all you can say about Robert E. Lee. Sherman understood what it took to win war. It wasn't pretty. One of his famous quotes is, "War is hell." And he knew what it took to win. Anyway, so making assumptions. Do not assume that a text only compares or contrasts. Most details in this passage focus on contrasting the generals. So, right, it doesn't have to be balanced as well. If you're, more about, you can have more of a comparison. You can balance it between comparison and contrasting, or you may have more contrasting elements. So, however, the passage here provides clues to ways in which the generals were alike as well. So leading into that, our first question here, what ultimate goal did both generals share? Was it A, both wanted to control new territory, B, both wanted to take food and livestock from farmers, C, each wanted to destroy the fighting spirit of the other side, or D, each wanted the war to end with victory for his side? Anybody taking a stab at this one?
D.
D is in dog, right? That one's, kind of straightforward. Yeah, you kind of figure most generals are going to want to win victory for their side, but you can also eliminate the other ones, right? Well, they don't really say that Lee wanted to control new territories. They don't really talk about controlling new territories at all as an objective for either general. And then both wanted to take food and livestock from farmers. Well, we know that was not the case with General Lee. That he forbid his soldiers to do that, and each wanted to destroy the fighting spirit of the side. We only hear that in regards to William Sherman, General Sherman. That was one of his objectives to win, was to destroy the fighting will of the Confederate States. So D is a dog for number one. 2, okay, new passage here, Minnesota Twins study. And I'm sure I'm going to be thinking about the baseball team the entire time I read this, but I know it's not about baseball. So when identical twins are raised apart, you can disentangle nature and nurture for a given characteristic by simply measuring how similar the twins are. You can double check your answer by comparing the similarity of identical twins who share all their genes and fraternal twins who share only half their genes. So yeah, that idea of nature and nurture, it's a child's, when the child does something, is it because it's in their nature to do that? Are they born to do something like that? Is it intuitive, or is it nurture, meaning that we have, basically learned that behavior over time? So the Minnesota researchers tracked down every pair they could find and measured traits related to almost every aspect of life: health, cognition, personality, happiness, career, creativity, politics, religion, sex, and much more. The Minnesota study reveals genetic effects on virtually every trait. The breakdown between nature, nurture, and everything else varies from trait to trait. But Miss Nancy Segal emphasizes the uniformity of the results, the consistent power of genes, the limited influence of parenting. Some findings go down easy. As most would expect, identical twins raised apart have virtually identical heights as adults. Some findings seem obvious after the facts. Genes, but not upbringing, have a pretty big effect on personality traits like ambition, optimism, aggression, and traditionalism. Other findings perennially cause outrage. The IQs of separated identical twins are almost as similar as their heights. Critics of intelligence research often hail the importance of practice rather than inborn talent. But a 3-day test of the Minnesota twins' motor skills showed that how much you benefit from practice is itself partly an inborn talent. Many of the study's findings are bipartisan shockers. Take religion, which almost everyone attributes to socialization. Separated twin data show that religiosity has a strong genetic component, especially in the long run. Parents had less influence than they thought over their children's religious activities and interests as they approached adolescence and adulthood. The key caveat: while genes have a big effect on how religious you are, upbringing has a big effect on the brand of religion you accept. Identical separated sisters, Debbie and Sharon, both liked the rituals and formality of religious services and holidays, even though Debbie was a Jew and Sharon was a Christian. Okay, so how does comparing identical twins who are raised apart help scientists understand the importance of nature and nurture? So is it A, because these twins have the same genes but different upbringing? Scientists can determine the extent to which upbringing and genes affect traits. B, scientists can determine whether genes affect upbringing. C, scientists can compare identical twins raised apart with fraternal twins raised together. Or D, because these twins have the same genes and similar upbringing, scientists can compare the effects of genes and upbringing. That's a lot to take in.
D.
D as in dog. It's A, because the twins have the same genes but different upbringing. Scientists can determine the extent to which upbringing and genes affect traits. So, this kind of goes back to our summarizing skills. If you read a passage like this, take a breath and do what you can to sort of paraphrase and summarize, because that really gets at answer A, really gets at the heart of what that whole passage is about, right? The twins have the same genes, but through different upbringing, scientists can look at how the upbringing as opposed to the genes affect traits. All right, so A is, or number 2 is A. And let's see, 3. So in paragraph 2, the author says that the study compared different traits in the twins raised apart. What did researchers find the twins had in common? A, genes had the greatest effect on a person's health. B, the effects of nature and nurture were the same for each trait. C, parenting had no effect on traits. Or D, genes had the most effect on traits.
D.
D is in dog. Yeah. Genes had the most effect on traits. And again, that kind of comes through as the main argument in that piece. So D for number 3. 4. So in paragraph 3, which contrast do the signal words but not make? So I'm gonna go ahead and find that paragraph.
After genes.
Yes. So right here is what we're looking at. Genes, but not upbringing, have a pretty big effect on personal traits. So that's what that, and that's one of those signal words, right? But that we're looking for that contrast. So A, genes have a big effect on personality traits, but upbringing does not. And that's just basically rewording that phrase, right? Just another way to look at that same idea that was up here in paragraph 3, genes, but not upbringing. That's often the case with texts like this. It's largely just throwing the words at you in a different way. Same idea. So A for number 4. And last one for the quiz here. What was surprising about the comparison of religion and identical twins raised apart? So genes did not have a big effect on how religious the twins were. B, upbringing had a big effect on how religious the twins were. C, genes had a big effect on how religious the twins were. Or D, genes had an effect on the religions that the twins chose.
B.
B, upbringing had a big effect. Take a look again. So it was C, right? Genes had a big effect, and it says there, it's like genes had an effect on how religious they were, not necessarily the religion they adopted, right? The religion you adopt had a lot more to do with your upbringing, your family upbringing, your social, where you are, who you are, where you're raised. But how maybe devoted you are, how much you enjoyed it, how interested you were in the tradition and the religion, that was based on genetics. That was genes. So C as in cat for number 5. Genes had a big effect on how religious the twins were. Okay, so running through here real quick, check our answers. So 1 was D as in dog. 2 was A. 3, D as in dog. 4 is A. And 5 is C as in cat. All right. And I will submit that. Yep. 1 is D. 2, A. 3, D. 4, A. 5, C. So are we all caught up here before we move on to the workbook? Any questions on the quiz? So far, so good. Okay. All right, workbook time. So slide down here. Slide over to our next activity. Let's make sure we're all together. Unit 1, lesson 6, compare and contrast workbook. And again, stating, if you're comparing things, you look for ways in which they're similar. Contrasting things, you're looking for ways in which they are different. And again, we're building on these ideas and we're working towards our own, later down the road when we start writing. And how do we make more complex ideas together? How do we make them flow together? And one of those ways is those transition words or signal words is what, a lot of these words that we're talking about, like however, in addition to, those phrases, similarly, likewise, you'll find them at the beginning of a sentence and they'll just like it says, it's used as a transition. So we're going from one idea to the next, and that word helps maintain a flow between the two. It balances out the statements, and it helps the reader focus in that there's going to be some type of change, right? Just like switching gears. We're going to get something new here. All right. And, okay, looks like a new text box. So, rebuilding a nation. So a little more history to go with our language arts. Rebuilding a nation. Remember, always take notice of the title. So as the Civil War came to a close, President Abraham Lincoln began to consider how the United States should be rebuilt. In his second inaugural address, he summed up the ideas on which he based his plan, saying, "Let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds." He hoped to heal the nation with as little animosity as possible between the North and the South. In his plan, former Confederates who agreed to support the Constitution and the United States would be offered pardons. Confederate states could join the Union if they established anti-slavery governments. Moreover, after rejoining, Southern states will be allowed to elect former Confederates to Congress. Radical Republicans in Congress, on the other hand, had a different view. In an explanation of the Radical Republican stance, Congressman Thaddeus Stevens stated, "Our fathers proclaimed the equality of men before the law. Upon that, they created a revolution and built the nation. It is our duty to complete their work. Under their plan, former Confederates would be banned from Congress and Southern states placed under military rule. The Radical Republicans also expected states to allow former slaves some rights afforded white citizens." So right here it says in our text, authors often use the structure of a text to organize the details they supply to compare and contrast. Here the author discusses one plan and then the other. So, that's the way it's organized. We start with Lincoln, his ideas to reconcile and heal in the beginning there, and then it talks some more about the details of how he planned to do that. And, we have that transitional phrase right there, those signal words, on the other hand. So we know we're looking at something different now. The author is signaling us what's to come next does not, it doesn't jive with what Lincoln was trying to do, right? So phrases such as on the other hand signal contrast. In this case, how the views of radical Republicans in Congress differed from Lincoln's views. And of course, we know, Lincoln was looking about healing. He was willing to allow former Confederates, if they basically renounced the Confederacy, to, they could serve in Congress, looking to basically bring, of course, is exactly what we did, bring the Southern states back into the United States. Radical Republicans were taking a heavier hand, wanted to punish the South more. There was, brief military rule basically, but they believe that should have been extended and should have been basically a harsher punishment for the Confederacy after the war. All right, so we'll start the workbook. Same passage to start with here, and our little test taking tip. So when answering a question, you may find information all together in one place or in different places in the text. Here, you need to read different parts of the text to determine ways in which the plans are alike and different. Like what I mentioned before, if you can read through a piece and quickly kind of summarize it, who were the individuals that was discussing, and what were some of the finer or main details, not finer details, but the main points. And that's basically how you can break it down. So let's see what our question is here. The Reconstruction plans of Lincoln and the Radical Republicans, A, aim to rebuild the nation as quickly as possible. B, feature different objectives for the process of Reconstruction. C, delegated much responsibility for Reconstruction to the states. Or D, impose similarly harsh penalties on the Confederacy. So what's the right answer here? What can we say about Lincoln and the Radical Republicans?
A.
A. B. B as in boy. Right? So they both wanted to rebuild, right? They both sides were wanting the war to end or move past it, but different ways, different objectives to achieve Reconstruction. So B as in boy for number one. Okay, same passage again. So in contrast to the Radical Republicans' plan for Reconstruction, how was Lincoln's plan best described? So is it A, peacemaking, B, punitive, C, bold, or D, ambitious?
A. Peacemaking.
Peacemaking, A, right? Compared or contrasted, I guess you should say, contrasted to the Republicans' plan, Lincoln was trying to take a much subtler approach and much more one about reconciliation, healing, and the Radical Republicans were more about a punitive Reconstruction and reconciliation towards the Confederate States or former Confederate States. So A, peacemaking for number two. Okay, in the new passage here, so starting off paragraph one, choosing organic or conventional food. So we know right away, right, in the title, what we're comparing and contrasting. Doubt we're talking about anything else. We're not talking about Monopoly and Scrabble or forks and spoons. We're talking about organic or conventional food. So people choose to buy organic foods for many different reasons. One of them is perceived health benefits, said Dr. Crystal Smith Spangler. Our patients, our families ask about, well, are there health reasons to choose organic food in terms of nutritional content or human health outcomes? To try to answer that question, she and her colleagues reviewed over 200 studies that compared either the health of people who ate organic or conventional foods, or more commonly, nutrient and contaminant levels in the foods themselves. Those included organic and non-organic fruits, vegetables, grains, meat, poultry, eggs, and milk. According to United States Department of Agriculture standards, organic farms have to avoid the use of synthetic pesticides and fertilizers, hormones, and antibiotics. Organic livestock must also have access to pastures during grazing season. Many conventional farms in the U.S., in contrast, use pesticides to ward off bugs and raise animals in crowded indoor conditions with antibiotics in their feed to promote growth and ward off disease. The Food and Drug Administration has been examining that type of antibiotic use and its contribution to drug-resistant disease in humans. Smith Spangler and her colleagues found there was no difference in the amount of vitamins in plant or animal products produced organically and conventionally, and the only nutrient difference was slightly more phosphorus in the organic products. There were more significant differences by growing practice in the amount of pesticides and antibiotic-resistant bacteria in food. More than 1/3 of conventional produce had detectable pesticides residues compared to 7% of organic produce samples. And organic chicken and pork were 33% less likely to carry bacteria resistant to 3 or more antibiotics than conventionally produced meat. So yeah, we're comparing organic food to non-organic. And it says here, how does the information in paragraphs 3 and 4 best relate to the main idea of the passage? So is it A, it explains the reason that people choose organic food. B, it introduces the elements being compared in the study. C, it explains the quotations in the first and second paragraphs. Or D, it shows that no significant difference exists between organic and non-organic. So paragraph 3 is, she and her colleagues reviewed over 200 studies that compared either the health of people who ate organic or conventional foods, or more commonly, nutrient and contaminant levels in the foods themselves. And then 4 is those included organic and non-organic fruits, vegetables, grains, meat, poultry, eggs, and milk. So how does that information relate to the main idea? Thinking back to our title, it's B as in boy, right? Those two paragraphs are largely introducing the elements being compared in the study, talking about non-organic and organic foods and what they tend to find in each. So number 3, B as in boy. Number 4, which statement best explains an important difference between organic farms and conventional farms? So A, conventional farms treat animals better than organic farms do. B, conventional farms use fertilizers, but organic farms do not. C, organic farms give antibiotics to animals, but conventional farms give growth hormones. Or D, organic farms must avoid synthetic products, but conventional farms may use them. What best explains the differences between organic and conventional farms? Anybody there? Give it a try.
C.
C, it's D. D as in dog. So if you think about organic produce, organic meat, right? We know that it's, it avoids any type of synthetic or unnatural products to raise it. So no pesticides, no antibiotics or steroids when it comes to meat. But there's less restriction when it comes to conventional farms as far as what they can have. So D is in dog for number 4. Number 5. So what did Smith Spangler find that organic and non-organic products had in common? So we're talking about comparisons here. What do they have in common? A, plant and animal products had the same vitamin content. B, food had the same taste when prepared the same way. C, animals showed the same levels of antibiotic-resistant bacteria. Or D, plant products had the same levels of phosphorus. Which one's correct here?
Maybe C.
It's A. So
A.
plant, right? Because they say in the passage that what we know is that regardless of it's organic or non-organic, they have the same nutritional value. It doesn't mention anything about how the foods taste anywhere, so we can eliminate that. Animals show the same levels of antibiotic resistance bacteria. No, we know that the ones that are raised in a non-organic farm, in a traditional conventional farm, has more antibiotic resistant bacteria. And plant products have the same levels of phosphorus. It also says that's the one difference. The one big difference there is that the organic plants seem to have more phosphorus. All right, so 5 is A. 6. So which statement best supports the conclusion that organic food may be healthier than non-organic food? So is it A, conventional farms are more careful to use pesticides to ward off bugs? B, pesticide levels in non-organic produce were considerably higher? C, organic meats contained no antibiotic-resistant bacteria? Or D, the nutrient level in organic products was higher? What's our correct answer here? Always think about the characteristics, right? When you're
Is
faced
it
with
C?
C, it's B. B as in boy. Pesticide levels in non-organic produce were considerably higher. So these type of exercises, try to mentally, or if you get some more practice or something, and I might do this at some point, put up some extra practice tests for you. Mentally or even physically, make a box, and you could have the non-organic foods on one side and organic foods on the other, and then write down some of the things that you see, as far as comparing and contrasting the two. So organic, we know they don't use pesticides. Non-organic, they do. Non-organic uses steroids and antibiotics. And that way, it's like sort of a summarizing as you go, then you can pick out the answers here. So B as a boy for number 6. And the new passage. So good fats and bad fats. Right away, we probably know what we're going to be comparing and contrasting, right? So with all the confusing news about fats, you might think it's easier to steer clear of them altogether. Not so. The good fats, including monounsaturated and polyunsaturated, can actually help reduce your risk of heart disease and lower your LDL, your bad cholesterol. And you may be surprised as to what's considered a good fat. For example, monounsaturated fat, the healthiest fat, is found at higher levels in olive, canola, and other vegetable oils. Nuts like almonds and peanut butters, nuts like almonds and peanuts, including peanut butter, and avocados, including guacamole. Polyunsaturated fats are also important to your diet, especially those that contain omega-3 fatty acids, omega-3s, which may decrease your risk of coronary artery disease, may protect against irregular heartbeats, and help lower blood pressure. Polyunsaturated fats are found at higher levels in salmon, trout, and herring, soybean and corn oils, walnuts, and sunflower seeds. Though the better fats are a necessary part of your diet, they still have the same number of calories as the bad fats and should also be eaten in moderation. Bad fats, saturated and trans fats, have that reputation for good reason. They can raise your blood cholesterol level and increase your risk of heart disease and stroke. Saturated fats come mostly from animal sources and include meats, cheeses, butter, and some plant oils like coconut and palm oil. Trans fats rarely occur naturally, are mostly manufactured by food companies to preserve foods and add texture and taste to them, and have no nutritional value. Baked goods, pie crust, cookies, crackers, margarine, and shortening may contain trans fats. Okay, so we got a drag and drop, and here we go. Here's our Venn diagram. So you see what we're saying here. On the right, you have bad fats, right? So over here on this side, strictly bad fats. In the center, you have this overlap with the good. So things that may or may not be good as far as fat's concerned. And then over here, basically strictly good fats. And that is your basic Venn diagram. Something on one side, something on the other side, and then items that overlap in the middle. And like I mentioned earlier, in Venn diagrams, you could have a third circle down here, or you could have another one, up here, all different categories. But the main idea of a Venn diagram is that somewhere those categories all overlap. So you have items that are going to fit both, and then only items that'll fit one side or the other. So looking at our list here and what we discussed, what do we think the bad fats are?
Butter.
Butter. What else?
Oil.
Oil is a maybe good or bad because it depends on the oil. Okay. What else might be bad fat?
Crackers.
Cheese, right?
And meat.
And meat. So the bad fats, everything I'm using to cook Thanksgiving dinner on Thursday. All the tasty fats go over here on the bad side, unfortunately. Yeah, so that's our bad fats. So, one way or the other, you kind of get into a process of elimination then. So, based on our passage there, what can we say are the good fats then? Nuts.
Trout. And sunflower seeds.
There you go, the sunflower seeds, right? And then that leaves our lonely crackers, which depending on it could go in either one depending on the type of fat that's involved. And therein lies your Venn diagram. And you'll probably see where I'm sure probably in social studies we'll see them at some point. I would imagine we'll use them there some, and then we might encounter them here from time to time. But perfect visual representation of comparing and contrasting, and that's what the Venn diagram does well. All right, so if we submit that, yep, we have all greens there. Okay, getting hungry looking at that. All right, so Articles of Confederation and the U.S. Constitution. So again, here's our comparison right in the title. You can imagine that we're going to be talking about the Articles of Confederation, which predated the U.S. Constitution. That was our governing document before the U.S. Constitution. So let's see what it says here. After declaring independence from Britain, the American colonies set forth to govern themselves. In 1776 and 1777, colonial leaders wrote the Articles of Confederation, designed to limit the national government's power to make and enforce laws. The Articles were adopted by Congress on November 15, 1777, and fully ratified by all states on March 1st, 1781. Although some important achievements occurred under the Articles, including a plan for new states in the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, the weak central government made it difficult for the states to function as one nation. In particular, the national government was unable to tax or regulate trade between states. Therefore, in the summer of 1787, a group of 55 delegates attended the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia to draft a more effective governing document. The Constitution they submitted for ratification in September established a strong national government with a president, a bicameral instead of a unicameral legislature, right? So that bicameral means two houses, right? So you got the Senate and the House of Representatives. Before, under the Articles of Confederation, there was only one body. And then the Supreme Court, which was in addition in the Constitution. So, and a Supreme Court which could settle disputes between states. The legislature was a mixture of equal and proportional representation. All three branches of government were powerful but checked one another. Other differences between the Articles of Confederation and the U.S. Constitution involved levying taxes, admitting new states, adding amendments, and coining money. Under the Articles, the states collected taxes, but under the Constitution, only the national government collected taxes. Under the Articles, new states were admitted by agreement of at least 9 states. Under the Constitution, new states were admitted through agreement by Congress. The Articles could be amended only by agreement of all states. The Constitution could be amended by agreement of 3/4 of the states. The Constitution removed the states' powers to coin money. At the time of ratification, the U.S. Constitution had no provisions protecting personal freedoms. Although states were concerned about a strong national government that did not secure freedoms, the U.S. Constitution became law when ratified by 9 states in 1788. The Bill of Rights was added in 1791. So here, there's like a direct contrast, right? They'll mention the Articles and what it did, and then right under it, they'll mention the Constitution and what it did in contrast or differently. So rather than separating by, one paragraph that everything is about the Constitution and then having another one about the Articles of Confederation, they sort of do it line by line here. Okay, so our first question, number 8. According to the passage, both the Articles of Confederation and the U.S. Constitutions were A, ratified by all states, B, signed by 55 representatives, C, written to govern the original states, or D, amendments to the Northwest Ordinance.
D.
D, it's C. C as in cat. And that's not really explicitly stated, right? But we can eliminate the other ones. So both of them were not signed by 55 representatives. Both were not ratified by all the states. It was just 9 for the U.S. Constitution. And then not really anything about the Northwest Ordinance here, other than it was mentioned in the beginning. So C as in cat for number 8. Okay, and so question number 9. Unlike the Constitution, the Articles A, create a plan for admitting new states, B, gave states more power than the national government, C, established 3 branches of government, or D, contained a Bill of Rights to protect individual freedoms. So keep in mind which order here, right? So unlike the Constitution, the Articles had what? Or did what? I think did what might be a better way to say that. think about the main idea between the two and what they did and didn't do. So what did the Articles do that the Constitution took away? C established 3 branches. So the Constitution established 3 branches. The Articles, however, did B. So the Articles gave more power, or gave states more power than the national government. And that's like a whole history lesson on in a different way. You know, we could talk about, you had one camp of politicians that wanted the states to have more power. They wanted a weak central government. And then if you ever listen to Hamilton, so Alexander Hamilton was in that camp that wanted a stronger central government and was fighting for a stronger central government. And the compromise basically was the Constitution, but it did centralize a lot of the things that were and federalized a lot of the things that were once state powers. So B as in boy for number 9. And number 10. So one difference between the legislative branch and the Articles of Confederation and the original U.S. Constitution is that the Articles of Confederation, A, provided for 2 houses of Congress, but the U.S. Constitution provided for 1. B, established the presidency, but the Constitution provided for a Supreme Court. C, had 3 legislative branches, but the Constitution had a single legislative branch. Or D, had a single legislature, but the Constitution provided for 2 legislative houses. And I'll point that out again right here. So Constitution submitted for ratification in September, established bicameral instead of unicameral legislation. So it is D as in dog, right? The Constitution had, or sorry, the Articles of Confederation had a single legislative body for federal government, and the Constitution provided for 2 legislative. So there's the contrast there. D as in dog for number 10. Yeah, I think we got 2 more here. So which act would have been possible under the Articles of Confederation only? So A, members of the Senate levied a tax. B, 10 states ratified a constitutional amendment. C, Pennsylvania had 2 representatives more than Virginia. Or D, the state of New Hampshire could collect taxes. So thinking about the contrast between the Articles of Confederation and the U.S. Constitution. Articles of Confederation gave more powers to the state, whereas the U.S. Constitution gave more power to the central government and the federal government. So considering that, which one of these would have been possible, more possible under the Articles of Confederation? And it mentions specifically that it took away this ability from the states. So it's D. They use state of New Hampshire as an example, but it would have been any state would have been able to collect taxes under the Articles of Confederation only. And it says up here that it was with the U.S. Constitution involved levying taxes. So it took away the ability at that time for states to levy taxes, and that was up to the U.S. government to do so. And then 12, our last one. All right, a major difference between the Articles of Confederation and the U.S. Constitution is that the Articles of Confederation, A, listed individual rights and responsibilities. The Constitution added the Bill of Rights later. B, enabled the states to function more as individual nations, but the Constitution enabled them to function as a single union. C, modeled French government, but the Constitution modeled British government. D, protected against the power of the British monarchy, but the Constitution protected against strong national government. What's the right answer here? So B as in boy, right? If we summarize that, the whole idea here, right? The Articles of Confederation enable the states to function more like individual nations. And that's the whole idea of a state to start with. If you use state in any other part of the world, it means country. And that was part of the idea of the Founding Fathers. But the Constitution enabled them to function as a single union. So with the central government, there was more of a focus on the entirety of the United States rather than the individual states. So B as in boy for number 12. So real quickly here, I'll run down our answers. 1, B as in boy. 2, A. 3, B as in boy. 4, D as in dog. 5 is A. 6, B as in boy. 7, our Venn diagram are good fats on the left-hand side, or nuts, trout, sunflower seeds. In the middle, which are our overlapping ones, was oil and crackers. And on the right-hand side, the bad fats were meat, butter, and cheese. 8, C as in cat. 9, B as in boy. 10, D as in dog. 11, D as in dog. And 12, B as in boy.